So I'm watching The Bad Batch, and I was watching it like at 5:30 in the morning yesterday, as you do, because that is truly the way they envisioned it, was in a dark room with your earbuds on your phone in front of your face in bed, because that's why they
It's real
put so
life.
much effort into it. That's what they want you to do. But no, so as I'm watching it, it struck me that, and this is why I asked Ash the question, I kind of feel like, and I said earlier that some of the best Star Wars storytelling has been in animation, but I almost feel like Star Wars should be mostly animation. And it's weird for me to say because it took me forever to get into Clone Wars. And as much as Christopher Sean is one of the coolest guys on the planet, I couldn't get into Resistance. But I think animation allows Star Wars to be as weird and huge and different as it can be. And that's why when you asked me about George, what would George do? I think George, that weird midichlorian story that we keep hearing sort of out there, do that in animation. I think if you brought the Mortis arc to television for the first time in live action, it would fail. It would flop. But as I was watching The Bad Batch, even just the fact that you can go to the level of artwork now, the when they do,
visuals of it.
it's crazy. I was listening to our friends Thank the Maker this morning. On their podcast, they do a weekly reviews of the show, and they mentioned it's like they said it looks like concept art that they just said, yeah, run with it. It looks great. So you now can literally do anything you want and not worry. Now, yeah, you got the volume and you got all the live action, and there's so much to be said for live action. But what do you guys think? Is Star Wars best told through animation because the shackles are off? You can do literally anything you want.
I say yes, and I don't make it a habit of trying to agree with you because
but I'm always right. So it's
but you're always right. When you're right, you're right. But it's the depth and the breadth of what you can do with animation, and just looking at what we have right now. You have Clone Wars / Bad Batch. That's one style. You have Resistance. You mentioned Resistance. Here's one of my dirty little Star Wars secrets, besides the fact that I haven't read any High Republic.
That's not a secret.
I have still not made it past 3 episodes of Resistance. I've tried no less than 4 times. I know, and I'm not shitting on it. I'm just simply saying it didn't do it enough for me to keep going. And I want to know that story. I truly, truly do. But stylistically, you have Clone Wars Bad Batch. You have Resistance. You have Rebels, which I love with every fiber of my being, and I talk about all the time. Then you get the Tales of Anthologies. You get Visions. You get Lego holidays. I mean, the Lego specials at all. Freemaker holiday specials. Like, animation not only has the ability to tell every kind of story, but has the ability to tell it in every kind of visual, unique way. Like, you could get a hyper realistic, something that looks like Madden football animated Star Wars series down the line. And you could go in and tell more of the old. And that's the other thing too. We've talked about this, I know, at different points. It also opens up, what do you want to do? Do you want to tell more stories set between Star Wars and Empire? Animation lets you do it, and you don't have to de-age somebody and argue about Uncanny Valley. You can just tell a story. Do you want to do something for little kids that uses the original audio tracks from the original trilogy? You can do that too and put it on YouTube for 3 and 4 minutes at a time. It's the multiplayer, as a baseball fan, you want that multi-tool utility player who can go play right field if you need him to. They can play shortstop if you need him to. Animation covers every one of those things and can be an all-star at the same time.
Well, I will say, and Lloyd, I'd love to have you weigh in on this as well. The biggest challenge to what I say as I say it, and I know I'm contradicting myself as I say it, but the biggest problem is nobody watches animation, and I don't mean that to be rude. My dad, Nick, you and I talk about this all the time.
I texted this afternoon. I asked you, "Is your dad watching Bad Batch?"
Watch Bad Batch? No,
and mine doesn't either. And we talk about our dads all the time.
So they're missing a great story, but it's a great place to tell the story. What are your thoughts, Lloyd?
No, I think animation's more of a generational thing, to be honest.
That could be. Yeah, that's true. Yep.
Like, were there cartoons and stuff like that? Yes. Okay. I don't like the Beatles' Yellow Submarine. Anyway, there were cartoons back then. Okay, in the dark times. So, but like I think when they started becoming more and more like mainstream in the 80s and the 90s and stuff like that, I think a lot of like, your parents, and my parents by extension, they just didn't really care. Right. So when Star Wars jumped on it in the early 2000s, that ship sailed for a lot of the older generation, I feel like.
Yep.
But for us kind of within, a 15, 20 year age bracket, it makes sense. So when people say like, oh, I don't like animation, I don't like how it looks, and that's fair, that's perfectly fair. But that's also why Lucasfilm branched out and they went with Visions.
Yeah, right. Trying to bring it to people who like a different style. Yep,
right.
For sure.
And I truly feel like if Lucasfilm capitalized on strictly a Japanese anime style story, it would kick off.
But again, anime, if you look at it, and I know anime has a huge following. I mean, that's like the understatement of the year. I get it. But it's a very specific genre, whereas Star Wars, I think the way you have to do it, if you're going to commit to animation, you got to do a full length feature film, and it's got to be like PG-13, so that it's not just, oh, let's bring the kids to the movies this Saturday. There's a Star Wars movie and it's dealing with some pretty serious shit, and it can't be Clone Wars. Sorry, Clone Wars, that movie and it did not age well. It really has not aged well as far as the way it looks, etc. But I don't know. I think it allows you to do the story you want to do, right? Because although we do live in a world now where basically you can do anything you want on screen,
right?
But
there's also, if you talk about the generational thing, and this kind of hit me while you were talking, and something Lloyd said triggered it too. Thinking about animation, thinking about adults and generational, how that connects. I see that point, but we also have to remember, especially, for Pete and I, our dads, animation, Snow White was in like 1950, whatever.
Right.
And you have Snow White, Robin Hood, freaking Sword in the Stone. Like, those are the movies that I grew up with that were out before I was born. And those were our parents' generations. And our parents grew up with us as kids watching, whether it wasn't, for me, it wasn't necessarily Aladdin, but for like my siblings, it was. And, animation has been a thing. Popeye, like, there is a connecting point to animation for older generations. It's almost like reminding them, you used to get these stories that way too, but then you became a grown-up and you had to do real life hard stuff.
Those stories were never anything that, I mean, the closest thing you got to an adult story for them was Flintstones and Jetsons,
correct,
right?
And that was, and that was specific. But then you kind of fast forward and you get to the late 90s and 2000s, and you had things like The Simpsons, you had things like South Park, which were grown-up stories. Fast forward to 2000s, you have BoJack, you have frickin', what's the one on FX, the spy one?
Archer.
Archer, so freaking good.
Metalocalypse is one of my favorite shows ever, but I can't let my kids watch it.
Right, exactly. So there is that point, and sometimes it's just a matter of like, I texted Pete literally like 5 hours ago, and said, "Hey, has your dad been watching Bad Batch?" And he said, "Nope," because the thought that was going through my head was, I need to try and get my dad to watch Bad Batch. He's 75 years old, but like, he should watch it. Like, I think he would enjoy it if he would just give it the chance.
Right.
I think that's a huge issue though with a lot of people though, is that they view Star Wars as a child's story, and it's something that it's always struggled with.
Yeah.
Right.
Always.
Yep.
So Star Wars is it's one of those things where it's damned if it does and damned if it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And as far as like the cartoon thing that goes, like, the older generations that got used to that style. I mean, it was one cartoon movie, like you mentioned, Snow White, Sword in the Stone, that kind of thing. It was one of those movies every 4 or 5 years because they were handmade.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nowadays you can pump that stuff out in a week.
Well, and they can surprise us with a 6-part Tales of the Empire, which looks, honestly, as great as the Bad Batches looked. That trailer
looks insane.
Somebody posted on Twitter, I wish I could remember who it was so I give them credit for it, but they said this is going to sound weird, but look at how good the dirt looks.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's true.
Well,
but
and if you want to dial it back to cartoons, let's go all the way back to 1984 and Transformers the movie. Optimus Prime dies in like the first 20 minutes. There's some adult shit going on in that movie.
Right.
Yeah.
Chris Ryan's Our Friends talks about all the time being traumatized by exactly that adult moment in that movie.
But I think that's what Star Wars would benefit if they would take it and turn a 2.5 hour animated movie kind of like a Studio Ghibli type thing, where it's like an actual like experience. It's not just like a movie; it's an experience.
Right.
So what if somebody took and cut together these 3 seasons of Bad Batch into a trilogy of movies? Because there's heavy stuff in these 3 like people are dying, people are kidnapped, kids are being trafficked. Like there's serious heavy adult things, but we're getting it in 28-minute chunks, and maybe it's just short enough that it's not fully like it hits, and we talk about it on social media and we spend time with it. But if you edited those 3, and people do this kind of crap on the internet all the time, take season 1 of the Bad Batch and edit it into a movie.
It would work.
It completely would work.
Because that first episode was over like an hour long.
Yeah.
And it would work. But the other 2 wouldn't, because there's too much missing in between each episode.
Right.
Well, but all the people who cry filler, right? You take that. I mean, look, and let's face it. This week's episode, right?
Not my favorite.
It wasn't your favorite, and honestly, it was a great 20-minute chase scene.
Yeah.
But it moved the story along a tick, which is fine. But
we've only got a few ticks left at this point, so we got to keep moving.
Well, and
last week.
I think there's some sort of contraction.